Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Kim Bender, and I am the CEO of the Heurich House Museum in DuPont Circle. Welcome to our program tonight, Legacy and Inheritance, a discussion about the evolution of DC's teaching schools. This program was originally going to take place at the museum until we decided that the frigid weather and the original threat of snow, although it looks pretty nice out now, would make a webinar much more inviting. So thank you all for pivoting with us to video. We hope that when things get warmer, you guys will come take a visit to the museum for a future program or tour, or to our beer garden, which opens next week. This program is a partnership among the Heurich House Museum, the Sumner School Museum, and the University of the District of Columbia. And today is an important day in the history of DC's education system. It's UDC's Founders Day. On this day, UDC celebrates its anniversary and honors the legacy of Myrtilla Miner, a white abolitionist who in 1851 founded the first African-American teaching school for free African-American women and girls in DC, which stood on the current site of the Heurich House Museum. Miner was an education pioneer, and her school can be considered a bedrock of education in DC. As UDC states on its website, this is a quote, Miner's efforts to privately educate minority youth and the resulting backlash from the broader community were the catalyst for increased support of public education for all children in the nation's capital, and ultimately to the establishment of the public university and urban land-grant institution is UDC today. The money from the sale of her school funded Miner's Teachers College, which taught the majority of DC's 20th century public school teachers, and was also one of the schools that merged to become UDC. The legacy that she created paved the way for education reform and practice in DC, and the drive, commitment, and passion of teaching has been inherited by thousands of students and teachers after her. Today, our panel will explore this legacy of DC education. After about an hour of discussion, we will start answering your questions, which you can put in the Q&A. And our panel today includes educators, students, historians, and experts, and will be moderated by the wonderful Amanda Huron, who will introduce our panelists individually after I introduce her. So a little bit about Amanda. Amanda Huron is a professor of interdisciplinary social sciences and political science at the University of the District of Columbia. Her research interests are in urban geography, housing justice, and the history of Washington, D.C. She teaches courses in D.C. history, digital mapping, and housing politics. Amanda was born and raised in D.C. So I'm going to pass the baton over to you, Amanda.
Thank you, Kim, and welcome everybody. It's so nice to see everyone here. Greetings to my fellow panelists and of course to everyone in attendance, including several of my students. Hello, nice to see you here. This is great. I'm really excited about this event this evening, and thank you so much to the Heurich House for hosting us, even virtually. But if you have not been to the Heurich House, you must go because it is a beautiful space, especially when it gets a little warmer. It'd be a really lovely place, lovely garden to spend time in. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of our panelists. We have 6 panelists that we're joined by this evening. So I'm going to introduce everybody in turn, and then we're going to kick off our discussion. So again, we're really looking forward to this discussion and to your questions. So please, please be thinking about what questions you want to ask. So first, I'm going to introduce Kimberly Springle. Kimberly E. Springle is a public historian and cultural preservationist with a focus on community history. Kimberly presently serves as the executive director of the Charles Sumner School Museum and Archives, the official museum and repository for DC public education. She has been the steward of the historic museum site for over 16 years and serves as a historian and archivist for the DC public school system. Kimberly is also the founder and principal consultant of GTMS Legacy Enterprises, serving communities and individuals nationwide in preserving their cultural assets and lecturing on topics related to history and cultural heritage. Kimberly earned her Master of Arts degree in History Museum Studies from the Cooperstown Graduate Program, State University of New York, Oneonta. She also earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in History with a minor in African American Studies from College of Charleston, South Carolina. Though she is a proud native of Greenville, South Carolina, Washington, D.C. has been her home for the past 24 years. Welcome, Kimberly. Next, I'll introduce Patricia Ford Neal. Patricia Ford Neal graduated from McKinley Tech High School in 1967. She graduated from District of Columbia Teachers College, DCTC, in 1971 with a BS in elementary education. She then received her Master's of Arts in Guidance and Counseling from Trinity University of Washington in 1979. She taught in DC public schools. 1971 to 1972, she was a teacher at Truesdale Elementary School, and 1972 through 1980, a teacher at Shad Open Space Elementary School. She later went on to teach in the Fairfax County Public Schools and retired from teaching in 2009. She is one of 5 girls, all educators and graduates of DC Teachers College, except one from University of the District of Columbia. All 5 siblings taught in DCPS. She's currently president of the Prince George's County, Maryland Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society. She's the co-chair of the Education Committee of the Prince George's County Lynching Memorial Project. And she's the coordinator at large of the Women's Caucus of the National Education Association, among many other activities. Welcome, Patricia Ford Neal. Next, I'll introduce Rashida Lowe Watson. Rashida Lowe Watson is a kindergarten teacher at John Francis Education Campus, a District of Columbia public school. Her experience teaching pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, and first grade has given her a deep understanding of the early childhood education system. In 2021, Rashida was selected as a DC Public Schools Chancellor's Teachers Cabinet member. She also served as chair of the Washington Teachers Union and the DC Association for the Education of Young Children, Early Childhood Task Force. Her exceptional skills and contributions were recognized when she was chosen through a highly competitive selection process in 2021 as one of the 17 inaugural members of the President's Emerging Leaders Circle of the National Association for the Education of Young Children. Among many other activities, Rashida is a member of the Office of the State Superintendent Teacher Advisory Council, and OSSI recognized her as a 2025 DC Teacher of the Year finalist. Rashida's academic journey highlights her commitment to early childhood education. She earned a Bachelor of Science in Early Childhood Education with a minor in psychology from Chicago State University and a Master of Science in Early Childhood Education specializing in bilingual ESL from Erickson Institute in Chicago, Illinois. Welcome, Rashida Lowe Watson. Next, I'll introduce Anika Burton. Dr. Anika Spratley Burton is an associate professor of education and currently serves as the associate dean of academics for the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of the District of Columbia. She received her bachelor's degree from Spelman College. She obtained her master's degree in English education from Teachers College, Columbia University, and earned her doctorate in learning sciences from Northwestern University. Dr. Burton is a former high school English teacher and administrator. Her professional experience has always been situated in urban schools. She has worked as an educational consultant, curriculum writer, and professional development facilitator for schools in Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Chicago. Dr. Burton's research primarily focuses on issues of novice and expert practice in teaching. She is currently working on a book examining the impact of Black educators in D.C. who were trained at Miner Teachers College and D.C. teachers. Welcome, Dr. Anika Burton. Robert Rouse is our next panelist. Robert Rouse is a teaching candidate in the Master of Arts program at the University of the District of Columbia with a concentration in elementary education. He is a native of Washington, D.C., and graduated from the city's public school system. In 2018, he completed his bachelor's degree at the University of the District of Columbia in psychology. Prior to that, he served with the Prince George's County Fire EMS Department. He has 2 adult children and 1 grandchild and has been a community volunteer for more than 30 years. Most recently, he served with Experience Corps as a literacy tutor for more than 5 years. Welcome, Robert Rouse. And finally, Natalie Davis. Natalie Davis is a proud Washingtonian with a passion for literature and education. In 2020, she triumphantly graduated from the University of the District of Columbia with a degree in English literature. Natalie has a passion for freelance writing and blogging. What truly sets her aglow are her independently published literary works, available on Amazon, A Contradictory Desire and The Diary She Never Wrote. These literary gems offer a journey through a coming-of-age novel and a captivating collection of prose, poems, and letters. Natalie also loves bringing joy and helping to academically and socially enrich young minds as an elementary education paraprofessional in the District of Columbia Public Schools. Natalie is currently pursuing a master's in teaching elementary education, K through 6, at the University of the District of Columbia, and plans to give her teaching services to students in her city. Welcome, Natalie. So now that you've heard all about our wonderful panelists that we have here this evening, we're going to get started with the conversation. So I'm going to ask each of our participants a question in turn, and they'll have a few moments just to kind of think through the answer to that question and give us their thoughts. And then we'll have a facilitated conversation based on those initial comments. And again, we're really excited to take your questions towards the end. So I'm going to start off with Kimberly Springle. Kimberly, you are an expert in the history of the DC public school system. Can you explain the evolution of DC's system of teaching schools, including the integration of schools that took place in 1954-55?
Thank you so much, Amanda, and thank you all for coming this evening. And of course I can. I would love to lay out some of that evolution, but before I get into the system of teaching schools, I want to lay a bit of the groundwork around the development of education system in Washington, D.C. in general. So public education starts in Washington, D.C., 1804, 1805. They started under the leadership and direction of then U.S. President Thomas Jefferson. This, of course, 1804, 1805 is a minimal structure that provided different tiers of education for certain populations. So of course, we're talking about the white population of the city, but also the educational opportunities ranged as it pertained to socioeconomic status. So for example, poor students had a certain curriculum versus more affluent students. The origin of public education excluded African Americans at that point, and a little bit down the line, we will learn later, post-emancipation in 1862 is when public education started. Now, that is not when education started for African Americans formally in Washington, D.C. There was early structured education systems as early as 1807, so not long after the development of public schools in the district. One of the earliest schools was started by a gentleman by the name of George Bell. And then you had other schools for free Blacks that were initiated under private philanthropic organizations and churches. So for example, where the Sumner School sits, there was a school there prior to the Sumner School being a public institution that belonged to Metropolitan AME Church. That was their land, and they established a school on that site. So again, by 1862, public education opportunities are now provided to African Americans due to a congressional act that occurs after the early abolishment of slavery in the district. So April is DC Emancipation Day. I want to point that out, which is 9 months ahead of the official Emancipation Proclamation. So going back and forth, the earliest public schools for white students were Eastern, also known as the Eastern Free School, and Western School, not to be confused with Eastern High School and Western High School, which comes along later, but generally where they were situated in the city. So I'll talk about who taught there. It was a little bit turbulent. They had about 20 different school leaders or principals over the earliest first decade or so. And the teachers who were there, were paid about $500 a year. And they were expected on top of that to contribute their salary to renting the schoolhouse. So again, you don't have any real structure of like any teacher training that's happening there. These teachers themselves had minimal education as we're talking about the earliest structures. The earliest public school for Black children was at what I believe is 4th and D Streets, Ebenezer United Methodist Church. That comes along in 1864, and that is the site of the earliest school. Later, you have the Stevens School that comes along in 1868, and the Sumner School, of course, in 1872, which also became the headquarters for the Colored School Division. Now, who taught at this school? You had Emma V. Brown and Frances Perkins, who were the earliest teachers at the school at the site of Ebenezer, and they were actually sent to DC from Boston area from a Freedmen's Society. Now, with the Miner Fund, we've heard a little bit about Myrtilla Miner and her impact, of course, and this is why we're all gathered here today. A preparatory school was started in 1870. Now, that was a secondary school, which is the predecessor to what is present-day Dunbar High School, and the advent of secondary high schools in the city. But as a result of this dire and critical need to populate newly emerging elementary schools post-emancipation, there was not a graduation from that school until 1877, and the earliest graduates were sent out to teach. So again, as far as teacher training at this point, we're really leaning on Myrtilla Miner, which leads me back to her and her influence and impact on developing the framework for teacher education as a whole, and the development of normal schools in Washington, D.C. So Washington, D.C. schools were segregated from its inception, as I've described, and operated on a dual system until 1954. Keeping that in mind, I'm going to share the origin and timeline for teacher instruction separately, or intertwining, because it happened separately. Formalized teacher instruction in D.C. really starts with Myrtilla Miner in 1851. So though there were a lot of dips and changes and challenges, it was her mission to train young Black women to become teachers. And she came here and did it with grave opposition from people like Frederick Douglass and others. She was threatened with violence, was physically attacked. It was not an easy situation. We're talking about it now in the present and talking about her contribution, but it was dangerous what she was doing. So I want to make that very clear. But this is, of course, the grounding for today's program and also the commemoration of the legacy of UDC. So 1851 is the official year that Miner starts her school. Due to financial struggles, the school closes from 1860 to 1871. Within that time period, Myrtilla Miner dies. But guess what? Her legacy does not die. And in 1871, the school is reopened in partnership with Howard University and opens under another name. In 1877, Miner School, now known officially on the record as Normal School Number 2, opens in a new building at 17th and Church Street Northwest. At this time, men are admitted into the school. A little over 10 years later, in 1879, the Miner Fund is no longer supporting the school, and it becomes an integral part of the DC public school system at that point. It isn't until 1929 that Miner Teachers College is authorized by the Board of Education. And up until this time, the school had transitioned from a 2-year program, a 3-year program. 1929, it is now a 4-year institution. Now, going back to the development of normal schools for white students, that started in 1873 as a 1-year program. It started in the Franklin School building, which is just a couple blocks away from the Sumner schools, really our sister building, designed by the same architect at 13th and G Streets, between F and G, I believe. In 1897, that training program became a 2-year program, and it was officially named Wilson Normal College after Superintendent J. Ormond Wilson. So also in 1929, along with Miner Teachers College, it became a 4-year institution where a bachelor's degree could be acquired, and it was renamed Wilson Teachers College. So though traditionally low enrollment for men at that time, men also could attend Wilson Teachers College. And I want to throw in that our founding director, Richard L. Hurlbut, attended Wilson Teachers College along with another gentleman who we have his collection, Bill Webb, who was the photojournalist and pioneering photojournalist and photographer for the DC public school system from 1968 to 1991. Now, in May of 1954, something pivotal happened. There was a significant Supreme Court ruling, Brown versus Board of Education, that ended school desegregation nationwide with all deliberate speed, but to a greater degree, and not perfect, in Washington, D.C., but there was a mandate that the schools would desegregate, and they did, for the most part, with the exception of border changes and things like that, boundaries, which is a whole nother topic for another day. But Brown versus Board of Education impacts, of course, the teachers' colleges. So in 1955, Wilson Teachers College and Miner Teacher College were merged, and integrated classes were held in both buildings. Those both buildings at the time include Wilson Teachers College, which was located at 11th and Irving Street Northwest, Miner Teachers College facing Georgia Avenue building is still there, as well as the old Wilson Teachers College, but facing Georgia Avenue on Howard University's campus. So they merged and integrated at that point and became DC Teachers College. So fast forward 20 years later, in 1975, DC Teachers College, Washington Technical Institute, and Federal City College all merged to form the University of the District of Columbia. So I want to say that the legacy of teacher education and preparedness in DC is rich and documented through the city's education history. This evening, you all will hear directly from those with lived experiences and additional testimony of the legacy through current teaching trends and education training at present day UDC. I also want to emphasize the continuing legacy through historic preservation, active and mindful collecting, and access through our local repositories. Starting with the Sumner School, whose physical existence, the building itself, is woven into the foundation of teacher training and preparedness and trailblazing educational opportunities for Black residents in DC for over a century. For the past near 40 years, the building has housed an incredibly rich collection, the official museum and archives for DC Public Schools. The collection dates back to the origins of public education and includes numerous collections documenting teachers, and our collections are still growing. In fact, about a week ago, less than a week ago, we conducted an oral history with a 91-year-old retired educator who happened to attend both a segregated minor teachers college and an integrated DC Teachers College, all within her educational portion. In addition to processing and making her valuable and insightful oral history available, there are still many other unknown discoveries we are working to make accessible to the public, further broadening this topic and the intellectual knowledge of this topic. I also want to note that there are amazing resources documenting the history of DC educators at UDC Archives, which houses records and archives pertaining to the teachers' colleges, the People's Archive at the MLK Junior Branch of DC Public Library, DC History Center, Kiplinger Library, and even Catholic University Archives. You will find remnants of people like Euphemia Lofton Haynes, who was a graduate and also critical to movements within the education system. I invite you all to visit the Sumner Museum. If you want to research, you must make an appointment. And also my colleagues at the other repositories mentioned. And with that, I hope I have given some good historical context to carry this conversation forward with my esteemed panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. That was awesome. Such a wonderful introduction to kind of giving us a sense of the framework of how this system of education has really evolved over time. We are going to hear next from Patricia Ford Neal, who, Ms. Neal, you graduated from DC Teachers College in 1971. And so you came out of this system of public education of teachers in Washington, D.C. And you were a longtime classroom educator here. So could you speak to the question of why was D.C. Teachers College so important to yourself and to teachers in D.C.?
Well, as a native Washingtonian, I started school right with that important decision to integrate schools in 1954. And I still have the picture of my kindergarten class was in the newspaper in the Post. And that was one of the first kindergartens that was integrated in the nation's capital. I've gone through all the public schools in the District of Columbia. And having 5 sisters, I have 2 older and 2 younger. We all went to the same elementary, middle, and high school, except my 2 older ones, because schools were segregated. We couldn't go to the school that was right across the street from us. But we went to DC Teachers College, and I got me started was when I was in high school at McKinley Tech. I was president of the Future Teachers of America Club. And so they would send you the information, and I used the information. They had an annual scholarship. So I submitted a scholarship, and I won $500 to DC Teachers College. And I was like, so excited because back in the 70s, that was a lot of money. And I think most of the teachers in DC, I would say 90% of the teachers in the DC public school system went to DC Teachers College. And those before integration went to the Wilson Normal School. And then most of the Black teachers went to the Minor Teachers college, and then when it's integrated. And we had excellent teachers. So when I started out, most of the teachers were white, and then we had an influx of Black teachers as um, time went on with integration. I think economics played a large part because we didn't have a lot of money. And if you have large families, looking for a school where you could get education and it wouldn't cost you a lot. A lot of Native Washingtonians went to Howard University and some Georgetown, Catholic University. But DC teachers, I think, had the largest enrollment of Native Washingtonians. And the economics, the price was so affordable that middle class parents and those who worked in the government were able to send their children to DC Teachers College to get a good education and you can get a good job. And at that time, there weren't many good government jobs for African Americans. You know, most might have gone to nursing or few went into some government jobs, but most of them went into teaching. And so at Teachers College, you form lifelong friendships and you got a foundation. We were always very proud to attend DC Teachers College. The teachers there were outstanding, and we had such high standards back in the 60s and 80s. The teachers were, or professors, I should say, were very supportive. They really want to make sure that you did your best. So when you left DC Teachers College, you had a solid foundation from the curriculum, the core standards that of education, and then the experience that you got. A lot of schools, students do not get the experience of going out into the elementary schools before they start teaching. At DC College, that was the primary focus to make sure you were prepared. You had demonstration schools in DC, LaSalle Elementary and Truesdale Elementary, and you would be sent to watch the demonstration teachers give lessons. And I was fortunate enough when I got to teach the first year at Truesdale Elementary School, and I remember having to do a lesson. We had guests come in, and you had chairs there, and there were always people coming in to observe. And so you had to teach certain lessons for visitors. And I think when you're a student at DC Teachers College, the observations that we got before we did our student teaching, we had experiences. And so we went out maybe 3 or 4 times. So you got to go to different schools in the city and you were able to sit in the teachers. You may have taught 1 or 2 lessons, but that was primarily the time for you to observe, to take notes. And a lot of teachers said they found it so helpful. I know my sister, she found when she was doing her observation, she just took a lot of notes, and something the teacher taught her was a lesson using the telephone. And she found out that resource and she contacted the telephone company and was able to get a set. And so she was able to use that in her classroom when she graduated. And she could teach her students how to use the telephone, how to introduce yourself, how to speak. And so you got those skills. Another person said they used a lot of the lessons from their physical education classes. They had learned many lessons of different games and things. And of course, in DC schools, you had to do recess and you had to provide activities for the students during that time. And she still has that little box of note cards where she used those games for her to go out to recess. And you had so many tips that you got from your teachers when you were observing and learning the discipline methods. You knew what to do. Because there wasn't a lot of money, you learned to do the grassroots. And so you had a solid foundation. If you didn't have a book, you could still teach. And even today, anyone who went to DC Teachers College in the 60s and 70s really got a solid education. And I can go into any classroom even today and teach a lesson without this edition, without a book. We used a chalkboard. We used phonics. And so we did so many things that were basic. And I always remember the 2 Doge word list. If the kids learned those 220 words, you could learn to read. And I think we're missing a lot of basic foundation today of the phonics. We taught phonics, and you don't see a lot of that today. So we learn how to use phonics to help the students to learn how to sound out words. You learn how to memorize those words each week so that when you read something, you would know those words. And anyone can read if you learn 220 Doge word lists. We also had that strong team companionship, support. You work together. And a lot of teachers today are still friends with their teams in the schools where they taught, I would say, 20 or 30 years ago. And I used to meet with my team. And so the support you got from the school, they would not let you fail. And in every subject, even art and music, they made sure that you knew how to do it. They helped you to do it again if you didn't know, and you could always come back to them. And they were so good in their methods and how they did it. And then when they came out to observe you and to give you the helpful um, notes and tips that you need to be successful, I think it really was a very supportive environment. And so most of our teachers, if you said you went to DC Teachers College, you know you were getting a good teacher.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. It's really powerful to have that perspective. We're going to move now to Rashida Lowe Watson, who is currently a teacher. Rashida, you attended a teacher's college in Chicago before becoming an award-winning teacher here in DC. What do you think is the value of training at a teacher's college? So we've heard about Pat's experience at DC Teachers. How would you add to that? What's the value of training in a DC Teachers College, sorry, at a teacher's college? And how have classrooms changed over your years as a teacher?
Well, I'll first like to say so much of what Pat shared resonated with me, and it brought back so many memories. My early experience with my teacher preparation program, and I didn't have the pleasure to attend UDC, but had I lived in DC, I would have attended UDC. So I grew up in the Midwest, and I went to Chicago State. Now, Chicago State was Chicago's Teachers College. And my decision to do that was very intentional. I knew that I wanted to be in education, and so I wanted to ensure that I was around the best of the best in education. Had I wanted to be in STEM, I would have went to MIT. If I wanted to be in art, I would have went to the Art Institute of Chicago. So I was very intentional with that decision. And then I later on went to Erickson Institute. But as I think about what was the value of that, there's several reasons, and Pat gave a lot of those reasons. What was key for me was the foundational knowledge of just having this strong preparation of theory, of pedagogy, child psychology. And we hear today like, oh, you learn everything in the classroom. And I understand that to a point, but that training really prepared me to be able to sit and say that I know my craft because of that experience. And I don't think that I would have been able to do that had I went a different route. So there's this foundational training and knowledge, professional development, community, which I heard Pat speak about, my relationships. The world around us is built on relationships. I have met my mentors who I get emotional talking about it because my mentors write textbooks. So I get to call the person who wrote the textbook or who wrote the curriculum. Hey, how do I do this? What do I need to do? So having access to experts, Pat said that word, having direct access to experts in the field, I think is very valuable. Preparation, certification, understanding diversity, understanding that classrooms are different. I learned that at Erickson Institute. So my reason for going to Erickson was because one of my mentors who co-founded the university spent her days primarily in inner city schools in Chicago. And so she wanted to ensure that teachers were trained for all children, specifically children who lack certain resources. And so I knew that I wanted to be in that environment. So I wanted to learn from the best there. So understanding, I gained this great capacity of just understanding that we are different. We require, children are different. Children require different needs and supports. Um, what I also learned or value is this commitment to continuing this lifelong learning. I think that had I not received this solid preparation from a teacher education program, it might have caused me to leave the field as most of my colleagues. I'm 19 years in. And so I think Pat's generation, most of you all are retired. And so my colleagues are like, oh, I can't do this anymore. It's time to leave. And so I am here and I'm looking towards retirement, but a lot of my friends have left. What keeps me here is because I had that solid training, and then I still have access to that support system, and that allows me to weather the storm. And so it's this commitment, and it's another word that I want to use to describe that. I can't think of it now, but this commitment to stay and and I'm prepared to tackle the challenges that I'm faced with in the classroom, which brings me to, I believe, your question, Amanda. How have classrooms changed? And we could probably talk on this call for 2 hours about that, Amanda. That's a really difficult question to ask. But I'll say this, our families are different. Families are different compared to when I started teaching 16 years ago, 17 years ago. Families are different. And so we have families who are working, we have families who may not be able to meet the needs to meet their children's needs, all of these systemic and society problems. So what happens is that enters the classroom. Families have children, children come to school. So in front of us, we have these kids who may not have their basic needs met. And so what do I do right now, today, as a kindergarten teacher? I have to meet their basic needs before they're ready to learn. And so that's the biggest challenge. And because I think teachers are trying to meet children's basic needs, so you are easily burnt out, right? You're being stretched by the family's needs and the child's needs. And then you have your district's needs as far as testing, and children can't learn if they're not ready to learn, but yet we need to move them. So teachers are burnt out. And so I think that's the core of it. There's so much more in that, but I think that's really the core of it. And we teachers, I think sometimes right now, like we're taking the hit on it because we have to solve all of these problems that's way over our heads, right? How can I solve the problems of our society that doesn't provide support for all families to meet the needs of their children? And so that's the biggest challenge for I would say myself, and I can argue that with a lot of my colleagues today, is meeting our kids' basic needs to teach them. In order to transform children, to change what's happening in the classroom, I really think we need to transform families. And if we can somehow change our focus a little bit, that might help with what we're seeing in our today's classrooms. But everything that I have learned in my early years in my teacher preparation program has really prepared me to make this positive impact, which is why I think I've been successful, this positive impact on children, which in return makes an impact on our wider community, which is why we're here, and which is why we have our preparation programs, is because we want to prepare teachers to go out there to change lives and to change our community. And I think that's the value. In short, that's really the value in that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. I mean, I really appreciate that, really emphasizing that the way that being trained at a teacher's college and really studying education and teaching has supported you throughout your career. That just seems incredibly powerful. And I think that's a really good transition to Anika Burton, who Anika, you run the Masters of Arts in Teaching program at UDC, so you are at the helm of training new teachers for the city. You're also writing a book on the history of Black women educators in DC. So the question is, how does teacher training at UDC build on this legacy of teaching educators in the city? And really to tie back actually to what Rashida was just talking about, what does it mean to work in this city and serve families in this city?
Thank you. So as I was listening to my colleagues talk, I was like, I was going to say that. I was going to say that because I too was trained at a teacher's college. So I started teaching in 1995, and that was after coming out of teacher's college in New York. So everything they said, I'm like, yep, yep, yep. And so as I think about the responsibility that I have in terms of our program, I don't take it lightly because, like we're talking about, it's not just about a job. It's not just about even the children in front of you. It is about families. It is about a community. It is about, honestly, a nation. And so as we look back on, especially as it pertains to uh, education of Black people and Black people in DC, really teachers often were on the forefront of a freedom fight. And so that ability to become a teacher changed the lives of those families, right? So if you're coming out of, an enslaved people, if we think about Myrtilla Miner, and now, okay, we're going to give this opportunity to, these Black girls to become teachers, that changed the trajectory of their lives and then their communities. And so that's the legacy that we stand on, is being at the forefront of offering people opportunity to change the trajectory of their lives. And so as I think about, and my students will tell you this, teaching is an enormous privilege. Like, people entrust you with the very best thing that they have, which is their children. And so we can't take that lightly. And I tell them, I work for the families of DC. I have to be assured that the product that we send out is worthy of their very best gift that they are sending into a school. And so that is, sort of the way that I think about it and the way that I hope my students come to think about it. And so all the things that, Rashida and Patricia are talking about, that preparation is essential. Like, we can't just send anybody into a classroom. Like, it's actually unfair to have people who are unprepared to deal with children, because the damage can be irreparable. Like, the harm that can be caused by someone who is not prepared, and the things that can happen in a classroom with a closed door, you know, it's scary. And so I take that seriously. And, Patricia talked about the reverence that she had, and Rashida as well, for the schools that they came out of. And that's the legacy that we want to continue at UDC, that people are prepared to walk into a classroom to work with all kinds of families and children and meet them where they are, and say it is possible. It's nothing is impossible. Nothing is can be denied you because of your zip code or your address. Like, that's foolishness. Outside of a traumatic brain injury, all children can learn. That's it. That's it. And so if we take that as our foundation, then we go from there and we say, okay, wherever we start, and what's the goal, and how do we move children? How do we love children? How do we work with families to go to that next level? And I really see that as UDC's legacy. And that is what I want our students to inherit and to continue in the city, because it it ultimately changes the lives of the residents of the District of Columbia. And I think that is more important now than ever, given the uncertainty of the world that we live in. Education genuinely is the key. So, you got to know how to read. You got to know how to survive. You have to know how to take care of yourself, because there's a lot coming at us. But we can do that with proper education. And I contend as a teacher that it starts with the teacher in the classroom. So it's on us. It's not on the kids. It's on us to ensure that they are ready to take the next step so that they can do and fulfill whatever their dreams may be. So that's what we're trying to do. That's what we will continue to do. We fight the good fight every day. And then we send out the next generation to continue that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. This is great. And I love, thinking about this connection between education and freedom. Education and liberation is so important, particularly in the history of our city and the history of Black education in particular in our city. I want to remind all of our panelists that if you have questions that are coming up for each other, to just jot those down, because we will have a little bit of time for discussion before we open it up for Q&A with the audience. But we're going to move now to our two panelists who are currently studying to become teachers at UDC. And we'll begin with Robert. Robert, you're a retired firefighter, currently studying to receive an MAT at UDC. Why did you choose this profession? And what kind of training are you receiving at UDC that you find particularly useful?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. I have served in the community for over 30 years as a mentor in some capacity. And in 2010, I became a community volunteer at a school down the street from where I live at in Ward 8, and served in a variety of roles. And when I would be in there reading to children, I noticed what I would have said, or older people watching me. Come to find out it was Experience Corps. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's an intergenerational program where adults 50 years and older work with students, supporting classroom teachers to work with them on literacy, kindergarten through third grade. And I did that for a number of years, worked in a variety of roles doing that. Always had a lot of respect for teachers, and having spent, even when my children were in school, supporting, to the PTA and however else I could as a firefighter, sometimes with my schedule, always wanted to do what I could. And I'm going to take what Dr. Burton said about trajectory. I like the idea of trying to alter the trajectory of the children. I've often told, and it's a little different being in the classroom from the mentoring. I typically would tell parents, my goal is not to change your child, it's to build on what you already have done. And I still feel that that's imperative that we do that, because they're going to learn so much from them. And I see our role as just trying to help shape and mold them so that they can think and process, analyze on their own from a perspective that is theirs. Why I chose the master's program at the University of District of Columbia, obviously I could have went into the classroom without doing it. However, my goal is to be competent as I was as a firefighter before I go into the classroom. And through the training that I have received thus far, the observation portions, it definitely, I'm coming in with a different lens from when I volunteered. Like I said, in a variety of capacities in classrooms over the last, I won't even count the years now. But now I'm also, I'll say, being challenged to process a lot of information, some of which I say will validate some of the things that I have learned over the decades, and some other things have challenged what I thought I knew. And so sometimes it's a little stressful, I will admit. And Dr. Burton's kind of nice and just says it's going to be okay in her own sort of way. And even my children, as they watch me sweat a little bit, and I have a handkerchief over here just in case I start now. But I think that the program and I think in addition to that, I got my undergraduate I went back and got a bachelor's in psychology at UDC in 2018. And I was grateful for the connections that I felt even at undergrad, that there was a desire to ensure that I knew my material, but more importantly, just trying to meet me where I am. I just want to learn as much as I can. So I guess that's really the long and short of it. I try not to go down too many rabbit holes, but I just have a tendency when I start reading something that's kind of interesting, which almost everything they give us is interesting. I just don't have enough time. But I do have a desire to ensure that I'm a competent educator, teacher. So that's why I chose the program.
Thank you. That's really wonderful to hear. And it's so interesting what you're saying about just being so interested in everything you're reading in the program. And I think that's a teacher's attitude, is you always want to learn yourself. It's like teachers are just interested in part, I think, choose the profession because we are interested in continuing to learn ourselves. So yeah, it's great to hear about that experience and kind of what led you to it, the mentoring work that you'd already been doing, and working with young people. So we're going to turn to Natalie now as our final panelist, and I'm starting to think of questions for you all. And again, if you have questions for each other, please let us know after we hear from Natalie. So Natalie, you are a published author with a degree in English, and are also studying, like Robert, to receive a Master's of Arts in Education, a Master's of Arts in Teaching at UDC. And so I'll ask you the same question. Why did you choose this profession, and what kind of training are you receiving at UDC that you find particularly useful?
Thank you, Amanda. Well, as you said, I have an undergraduate degree in English Lit, and that's where my love for education started. Literacy and literature is really important when it comes to, having those life skills, especially for students. And I wanted to use my skills and, start with I'm sorry. I wanted to work with students, starting from, the very foundation. Worked with students with the Literacy Lab under AmeriCorps for 3 years, and it was intervention work. So I was doing a lot of one-on-one to help students in kindergarten through third with their literacy skills. And what really made me push further into the classroom as a para with DCPS was the praise and the thanks that I was getting from the teachers that I was working with when pulling their students out, and how they said at the beginning of the year, this student started on this level and now they've jumped up here. And it just made me feel like I was giving the service that, I felt like I could provide and I wanted to provide in the classrooms. And so after I did that, I said, okay, Nat, I think it's time to step further in there. And so I've been a para for 3 years, and it's definitely been different being in a classroom and not, working with one grade. I've been a para in first grade and kindergarten for 2 years. And it's definitely been different than doing the intervention work, like Robert mentioned. You're seeing the same kids every day. You're building those relationships. And I really do believe that that's what's really pushed me even further to want to be in UDC's education program. My students love me. They call me mom sometimes because they know that if they are confused about something, or they just need a shoulder to cry on, or they might, need their basic needs met, as Miss Rashida mentioned, they know to come to Miss Natalie for sure. And I just want to make sure that once as I am in the process of becoming a teacher, I am getting, the proper training, as Robert mentioned, so that I'm not just in the classroom, not knowing what to do, how to handle certain situations, how to carry out the curriculum, how to differentiate the curriculum. Analyzing the data so that I know where my students are at now and how I can push them and where they ought to be months come. And I want to be able to be that person that my students come to and say, you're the best teacher. I love learning because of you. And I get that now. And sometimes I'm like, do you really mean that? Because sometimes I will hear my students say, this is boring. I don't want to do this. And I'm like, okay, let's figure out a way where we can make it interesting for you. And I feel with UDC's program for education, culturally responsive teaching has been weighing heavily on me, so that I know that when I step into my classroom, I'm able to use certain tools for my students because of the population that I am educating. I don't want my students to feel like they can't see themselves in the lessons. I want them to be able to see that the lesson is reflecting them, and that they are, they are able to put themselves into whatever activity that we're doing or the story that we may be reading, and that they can relate, so that they can shout out and say, I did this, or I can relate to that, or yes, that's me, that's how I am. And that's just something that I want to hear all the time as a teacher. And right now, transitioning from being a para to a student teacher has been a bit difficult, because I feel like my students still kind of see me as the para and not really the teacher yet. And so I'm kind of working on my classroom management right now, and UDC's program is definitely helping me with that. But we're getting there. We're getting there in my classroom. My students are really starting to see, oh, Miss Natalie is not playing. She's really becoming Miss Davis now when it comes to the teaching of the lessons. Yes. And I've had a talk with them about, I'm doing this so that at some point I can continue to educate them, whether it be when they go on to first grade, second, third, and beyond. I want to have them remember me as a teacher that, saw them, understood them, cared and loved for them, and that helped them to enjoy learning and also just become excellent students in the classroom and even outside in society as they get older.
That's awesome. Really inspiring. Thank you so much. So yes, it's really inspiring to think about the next generation of teachers who are coming, and again, building on this legacy that we have in the city. This is wonderful. It's a little after 7, and we have until 7:30. We have time for a little bit of question and answer among the panelists, and then again, questions from the audience. We already have a question that's come in from Patricia Ford Neal to ask Kimberly Springle, if you could tell us about the yearbook collection at Sumner School Museum and other items you have on display at DCPS. And then I think also Patricia wanted to share an image, and I think you can go ahead and do that, Patricia, or maybe there's a way for someone at Heurich House to allow you to share an image.
Okay. This is a book that was written by one of the members of Delta Kappa Gamma Society and Delta Chapter, and it's called 200 Years of Public Education in the Nation's Capital from 1804 to 2004. And it really gives you a history of some of the things that happened over the years. And it just has some brief profiles of different teachers in DC public schools and where they taught and what their skills were. And we have so many teachers that had doctor's degrees that were in the classroom. Had a wide range of experience, but we just had some excellent teachers. But this book I'm going to give to Anika because I've been trying to get it to UDC so it can go in the education department. It's an excellent resource to learn about what some of the things that teachers did from in the 1800s and in the early 1900s up to 2004, and so 2014. But it's profiles of 500 key women educators. So it's going to be a resource I'm going to leave with Anita, because I think students will find this very interesting and motivating as they pursue their challenges to be a teacher and to be better in the classroom.
I'm going to say thank you now, because we're actually building an education library. Just waiting for facilities to move some things around and put some bookcases together, because we did get a donation from the Education Society group at American University. So that will be one of the first books on our shelf.
Okay.
So thank you. Woo, I'm excited.
Okay.
And to answer
Yeah.
Pat's question, thank you, Pat, for bringing that book up as well. It's Dr. Marion Hines that compiled and edited that edition, and dovetails right with the Sumner collection because she did that work through documentation, some interviews, but mostly through records, and she spent a considerable amount of time in the Sumner Archives collection. So what do we have? Our foundational collection is the Board of Education meeting minutes. So it's a system-wide narrative of what's happening and also documenting people. So I can stick to the subject of documenting our teachers. One of the most phenomenal things in the Board of Education meeting minutes are the retirement records. So there are, if you can see my hands, is about this long of cards sequentially with just list of retired educators. And then you can take the date and go to the Board of Education meeting minutes that we have on the shelf. And oftentimes, and more times than not, there is an acknowledgement of service there. So it will not only share about their in-service contribution to the schools that they attended, but biographical as well, maybe where they're born. Sometimes, for example, there was a educator who was involved with starting a yacht club in DC. And so he built boats and was in industrial arts, but he also had a farm in Maryland. So that was noted in the minutes. So those are incredible. In addition to that, we have vertical files on every single school that existed in the system, which also includes information on namesakes. Many of our school namesakes are named for former educators as well, which is also a window into biographical information and who these people are, whose names are emblazoned on our buildings. We have yearbook collection, which is very popular, outstanding of all of many of our high schools, junior high school, middle schools, elementary schools, and also vocational education and DC Teachers College Miner and the Hickory Stick from Wilson Teachers College. So that's also just a wonderful collection to get a narrative and see the evolution of the schools, what kinds of curriculum is being taught at different points and times. We have three-dimensional objects, portraits, athletic gear, cheerleading uniforms, trophies, plaques, any kind of material culture you can think that defines a school. But so we have a considerable archival collection of documents and things of that nature, and also materials and objects that tell the history. We've also received many papers and documents. I talked about it a little bit in my intro from individual educators. Pat, we need to collect from you because I know you have a lot of stuff. And as I'm listening, we also collect oral histories and want to expand that so that we can make sure we get these stories, because teachers just aren't, thought of as, let's get your story about what you're doing. Like teachers, educators are in the trenches teaching our children. But what we do at Sumner is we illuminate those kind of lesser known voices and get those stories. So we're really trying to put more resources and do more oral histories and capture these stories because they're very important. Yeah, and come visit. I'll take you around.
Wonderful, thank you. We've had a question come in from our audience. And again, if you're in the audience, you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A. So this question from Dr. Arlene Kingberry is, share how your teacher preparation program prepared you to meet the needs of students with disabilities and how you prepare support new teachers in that. So I don't know if anybody in particular wants to take that question on.
So I'll talk a little bit in general about UDC's program and our approach. So one of the things we had talked about earlier in this panel discussion, you asked Rashida the question about, like, over the course of her career, how she's seen education change. And I think one of the things that I hope we're doing a better job of is recognizing the differences in the children and the families that we work with, and making sure that we are tailoring our lessons in such a way that they're not just cookie cutter, everybody gets the same thing, but really recognizing where children are and what their needs may be. Sometimes, as an educator, because of our training in a teacher's college, we might spot things sooner than a parent even would, because when you're in a family, you oh, that's just the way so and so is. You know what I mean? And we kind of just adapt and adjust. But as a teacher, you can see the child, from that learning perspective. And our hope is that we are preparing our students, one, to meet the needs of those children, offer the support and the services, the technologies that they might need, but also to be able to have, let me say, this is my big thing, and this is an area where I think everyone can grow. We have got to do a better job of working with our parents as partners. I don't know when that changed, but somewhere along the way, it changed. And so, back in the day, like you worked with the parents, you called the parents, you worked as a team for children, and now we've kind of gotten away from that. I know teachers, not my kids, but I know teachers who are afraid to talk to parents, and there's no way that we can help children if we won't speak with their caregivers. And so I say that to say that if we are recognizing that a child may need additional services or some sort of adaptation accommodation, then we need to know how to respectfully engage with our parents and our families so that we can truly partner to help children succeed. And so I think that's one of the things that we try to do in the program is provide them with that foundation and preparation, whether that be students who are differently abled or even students who are multilingual. As our society changes, I'm trying to push UDC to be on the forefront of that as well. How do we work with multilingual populations? So thank you, Dr. Kingberry, for that question and always reminding us of all the populations that we serve.
I'd like to add something to that. Also, I think you learn when you're doing your observation student teaching and you learn in class how to identify students that have special needs. Because, not too long ago, I'll say back in the day, we didn't have a lot of special education resources. And so the classroom teacher had to meet the needs of all the students. And so you learn how to work. And we didn't do a lot of whole group teaching. We learned how to teach students in groups. And I think we've gotten away from grouping students, and we would call it group 1 and group 2. And you had groups for reading, you had groups for math, and you would do some individual work with students who need some extra help. And also you have to remember the local screening committee. A lot of teachers don't know if a student is really struggling and having issues that you need to refer them to the local screening committee at the school so that the teachers and the psychologists and social worker and special ed curriculum coordinator can look at those needs and see what's the best program for the student, whether they need a 504, whether they have emotional learning disabilities, so they can get the proper assistance in the classroom. If they're never referred, they don't get the help. And sometimes a learning disability may be a behavior problem that you observe, and the kid is acting out because they can't do the work or they can't read and they don't want others to know, so they disrupt. So you have to learn about students and their behavior. So I think that's another way that we meet the needs of students in the classroom.
Great, thank you. And thank you for that great question. Another question that's come in here, this is from Rico, and this question is for Rashida Lowe Watson specifically. You mentioned that one of the things that's changed in the classrooms is the families of the children, and you proceeded to mention that students' needs often aren't getting met. Does that imply that students' needs were getting met back in the day, but now something has changed? If so, is there any reason that come to mind for the change of students' needs going from being met to now not being met?
Again, this is one of those complex questions and answers here. And I was going to respond to Pat, but I'm going to try to answer this question to the best of my ability. I don't think that we didn't have issues that we have now. We didn't have them. We had them before. Poverty is not new, right? This has been around. We've always had children with special needs. And before I answer the question, I was going to throw this question out. I wonder if our teaching styles might have changed. That's something that has changed throughout the years that could impact how we see our special needs children quickly, more faster than before, because teaching, the way we teach has changed versus now. But going back to those issues that I say that right now I have to meet my students' basic needs first. So yes, these issues were there before. try to paint this picture, I remember starting off teaching kindergarten, and the school day was half day. I didn't teach kindergarten whole day, it was half day. So I would have one group from 8 to 12, and the parents picked them up in the second group. So it wasn't whole day. And so I didn't have children tired. They were there half day. There was, more family time. And I don't know when that shifted, or maybe that was just in some geographical area in Chicago, but I grew up in an inner city in Chicago. Uh, these were communities of working families. And so I remember half-day kindergarten, then it switched over to whole-day kindergarten. Now present day, children are in the classrooms without, and I'm trying to be very careful how I say this. What teachers are asked, ensure that you have snacks. I need to have snacks in case someone is hungry. I need to have a comfortable space in case they need to regulate or get rest. So to me, that's food. That's a place to get rest. That didn't happen before you got here. And so that, I say, is the challenge now. I do think it was there before, but I think in our society there had to be, we had supports, there were different, we've changed family supports, whether that was systems, home systems, can't think of them now. Something changed, and this word change, I can say over and over, something changed where the support is I don't want to say non-existent. Families maybe don't have access to it or knowledge of it, but it's there. I'm spending more time feeding and ensuring children get rest versus teaching. I'm spending more time in the classroom versus in the beginning when it was half day. Rico, I don't know where that shifted, what policies in place shifted, maybe food programs or resources for families, shelter programs or resources for families. The makeup of families have maybe has changed from how can a family member pick up a student at noon? So who's picking up that child at noon? That lets me know he or she is not at work, or maybe there's an extended family. You have your parents in the house, grandparents. There's someone to pick up the child at noon, or to, do the 12 to 3 o'clock time, versus now my students are usually there before me, 7:30, before care, after care, 6 p.m. because the parents are working. So what in society has changed that, or what programs are not there before, where we have this difference in time in the schoolhouse and the needs that teachers are providing for students? I don't know where that has shifted or that has changed, but yes, I'm saying there is definitely a change, even in my short time of 18 years, 19 years, from the beginning of my days to now. I feel this heavy lift, where I have to do what Dr. Burton said. I have to make sure that I'm establishing that relationship with the families. I'm spending more time cultivating that relationship, that partnership, so that I can reach that child. And in the beginning, even in the inner city of Chicago, south side of the Chicago public school system, a lot of my students were coming to school for socialization. They were really being taught at home. Families were learning things at home. And we were learning just how to be a friend in the classroom. And we were in kindergarten, we were playing with manipulatives and things, versus now, I'm testing a lot during the day. So there have been some large changes in policy, changes in society programs, I think, that has impacted just that difference from 18 years ago to present day. And I can't tell you, I don't know, Rico, what those are, what those society things are, what those programs are that has impacted that. I just know that there's a difference. There's a difference. I hope that answers your question. But it's really complex. It's just really, complex. And Pat mentioned a lot about that too. It was easy to reach all of the children. You were doing these things that you were taught that was best practice in the classroom. And then we have different, we have people from different careers in the classrooms now who may had a different type of experience in their years, preparing them for that um, introduction to teaching. So there's several different factors, I think, while we're seeing so much of these challenges in the classroom. And not to say that it's anything wrong with changing careers or if I had a degree in law of a lawyer and I decide I want to go teach tomorrow, it's nothing wrong with that, right? But I do think a certain preparation, just that knowledge of what a child needs to know and how to be able to do that, just simple things like that. Like I know what development is. I know how to teach that. I know where this child is on this continuum. I know what to provide for him or her. Now, if you don't know, then you're going to be in the classroom and you're going to have to just do what someone is telling you to do or what you're reading in a book. And so kids get lost in that, so it's a very complex thing, a lot of factors. I wish I had the magic wand and the answer to solve those challenges. I don't. But one thing I can say about change and moving ahead and what's next, you don't think about what didn't work. You look towards working on something new. All right. So we know we're here. I have these challenges in front of me. What's ahead? And so that's where I'm looking to. What's ahead? What do I need to do to move them ahead?
Great. Thank you. These are really, really big, meaty questions to get into for sure. We just have about 5 minutes left in our program. We've had a few more questions just come in, but unfortunately, we're only going to be able to take one of them, I think, because we just don't have enough time. But this question is from Natalie Mazel, and she asks, how can schools better incorporate mental health awareness? Actually, it might relate to this discussion. How can schools better incorporate mental health awareness and support into their teaching practices? And if there's anyone who wants to speak to that, please go ahead.
I'll speak briefly to that. When I went into county, I went into counseling after 5 years of teaching. So I did elementary counseling and middle school counseling. And I think you have to use the resources that you have. Some mental health is put into the health curriculum today, but a lot of times you can have the school counselor come into the classroom and help with some of those issues and helping children to understand how they're feeling those situations. They also pull them out of a small group. But I think some teachers also taken on added curriculum dealing with health issues. So I think they're getting in the curriculum today. It's just so much to try to put in there that it gets squeezed out. A lot of the PE teachers teach health, part of the time, and then they do the physical activities. So it's in the curriculum, but it's how to fit it in the day when the emphasis is on testing. They don't get enough of it. And I think that teachers can fit it in every day. Like when we came back from the virus, being out of school during the pandemic, a lot of students had health issues and they came back and they weren't addressed. So I think you have to build it. You have to make a conscious effort. And I think a positive quote, you could go around and say, how are you feeling today, to get a sense of how they're feeling. And then those issues, you could refer to the counselor or to the worker. But I think it's up to the school, how they operate. It's up to the curriculum that's put out in the different schools and what's emphasized. And then if the teachers get to it, because some teachers say, well, I don't have time to do that. I'm just going to focus on the math and the English. I've got to get these skills covered. So the mental health is important, but I think they are working it in, and they do have in some schools relaxation rooms where the children can go and relax if they're very stressed. Recreation used to be a time for mental health to relieve that stress. And that's why we felt it's so important for students to get out and run around, get that fresh air, to move, because they're in front of the computers and their phones. And that's not healthy all the time. So we had a lot of movement in our days. And even in the classroom, the teachers would take breaks and bring those things in, and breathing exercises and things like that, and meditation are brought in. So I think that deals with some of the mental health. But some of the other teachers might be able to speak to what they're doing today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Does anyone else want to speak to that question?
I will say one of the things when we talk about being prepared is understanding also the resources in your building. And so one of the beauties of UDC's program, or I'll say UDC, and the division that Dr. Mazzell, who asked the question, she's in charge of this division. We have education, we have social work, we have speech, and we have counseling. And so my goal, my dream is that one day, as all those students are getting trained, many of them go into the school system, we need to start even in their training, teaching them how to interact with one another, the types of questions, the types of information, because they all see things from a different lens. And so, you have support in a building. There's a counselor, there's a social worker, there's, if someone needs speech therapy. And so that is also a way, as we think about mental health needs, who are the resources, who are the professionals who are trained? Because like Rashida said, we take on a lot as teachers, and that can lead to burnout. But there are other people in that building who are trained to do and to help in certain ways that honestly we aren't trained to do. So there's a line, and then I think it's really important as professionals that we say we understand our limits, and there's a time when you have to say, okay, now I need to hand this off. I need to, that is the ethical thing to do. And it also helps to reserve, preserve some of our energies, because we can't do it all. So in that building, we have to work as a team. And so teaching, especially novice teachers, how to, work with the other professionals in that building is a way that we can help to better address the mental health needs of students today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anika. And thank you all so much for this really inspiring discussion this evening. It's just been so wonderful to have this group of people all together and hear about this experience teaching across the decades here in DC, and really thinking about that legacy that UDC in particular is building on as a teaching, the teaching education that takes place there, the long legacy that it builds on. Thank you also so much to everybody who's been in attendance, to those who asked questions, to those who've been listening. It's just, again, very exciting to be having this conversation. And I also want to thank Kim Bender, Executive Director of the Heurich House, for hosting us. It's been really a wonderful evening. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Amanda, for being such a great moderator, as always. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to this panel. And, it was just very inspiring to hear all of your experiences and how you think about your students and think about the teaching profession. We hope that the audience will come join us for more programs in the future, hopefully in person, in warmer weather, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.